The candle beside me trembles as though it carries the weight of my silence. Its small flame bends each time a draft sneaks through the cracks of this old convent, flickering against stone walls that have heard prayers, confessions, and secrets far darker than mine. Yet tonight I feel as if these walls lean closer, demanding that I speak what I have buried for so many years. For decades I allowed silence to define me. I convinced myself that prayer could erase the memories, that work could drown out the whispers of the past, that obedience would shield me from truth. But silence is a cruel companion. It does not protect. It corrodes. It grows heavier each year until it presses on the chest so fiercely that even breath feels like sin. I was not always the woman who kneels at the altar and answers to vows of chastity, obedience, and poverty. Once I was a daughter who believed home meant safety, a girl who thought family bonds were sacred and unbreakable. That illusion shattered the moment I discovered that those who should protect you can sometimes become your jailers. Tonight, I open this wound not because I enjoy the pain of remembering, but because I must show that wounds can heal. They may leave scars that never fade, but even scars can become proof that survival is possible. My name. It has not been spoken here with its full weight in a long while. Among the sisters, I am simply called Sister Annabel, a voice in the choir, a presence in the chapel. But before vows, before habit, before cloistered life, I was Annabel Cross. And long before the convent doors gave me refuge, I was a prisoner inside my own home. A prisoner not of stone or steel, but of fear, manipulation, and betrayal so profound that even the light of morning could not free me. Was born into a modest family in a small American town where neighbors greeted each other by name, and every Sunday meant church bells and pressed dresses. From the outside, our lives looked simple and orderly, as if nothing dark could slip between our walls. My father worked long hours. My mother managed the house with quiet determination, and I was the youngest, the child expected to be sheltered by her family's strength. But what I learned early is that appearances can be the most dangerous lies. Behind closed doors, I was not the cherished daughter. I became something else entirely, something unspeakable, until tonight. It began when I was just entering the fragile space between childhood and womanhood. That season of life when innocence still lingers, but new questions rise, when a girl watches the world with curiosity, yet still needs the safety of those she trusts. For me, trust was shattered one ordinary afternoon in the very place that should have been safest, our own home. My brothers were supposed to be my guardians, my playmates, my protectors. Instead, they became the architects of a prison that would confine me for nearly 10 years. I did not understand it at first. How could I? A child does not recognize the tools of manipulation when they are wielded by the people she loves. I only knew that their words cut differently, that their eyes followed me with a weight I had never felt before, that laughter around the table slowly turned into threats whispered in corners. And when fear became my daily bread, silence my constant prayer, I realized that home had turned into captivity. There is a peculiar cruelty in being trapped where no chains are visible. To the outside world, I was free, walking to school, running errands, smiling politely in church pews. But inside, every step was measured, every word rehearsed, every look weighed. My prison was built not of iron, but of shame. They told me no one would believe me, that if I ever spoke, I would be branded a liar. At first I resisted, then I doubted, and soon I began to believe them. Nights became the cruelest companions. I would lie awake, listening for the sound of footsteps in the hallway, the creak of the door, the voices that whispered threats heavy enough to silence even my prayers. I would pray beneath the covers, clutching a small wooden cross until my hands cramped, begging heaven for protection. But heaven seemed silent then, and silence deepened my despair. I cannot tell you how many times I considered ending it all, How often I thought of slipping away into permanent silence. But something, perhaps stubborn hope, perhaps divine intervention, always kept me tethered to life. A small voice whispered that maybe one day someone would see me, truly see me, and rescue me from the invisible chains that bound me. And that whisper proved true. For as much as this story is one of betrayal and captivity, it is also a story of discovery, of a moment when truth broke through lies. But that moment was far from simple. It came only after years of pain, after my body bore the weight of unspoken suffering, after my soul cracked beneath the burden of secrecy. I reveal all this not to shock you, not to paint myself as extraordinary, but to offer a window into how faith is sometimes forged not in quiet chapels, but in dark prisons of the soul. My vows today are not the beginning of my faith. They are the culmination of a struggle that began the day my innocence was stolen and continued until I learned to reclaim my voice. If you listen closely to my words, you may feel the tremor of old fear. But listen also for the strength that rose from that fear, because I am here, not as a victim defined by those years, but as a woman who chose to live, to forgive where I could, and to find refuge in a higher love. Tonight, I light this candle not just for myself, but for anyone who has known captivity, visible or invisible. This flame is frail, yes, but it refuses to go out. And like it, so did I. But before I could reach this convent, before I could speak the name Annabel Cross without trembling, there was a day when the truth finally came crashing into the open. A day when my prison door was forced ajar, not by my own hand, but by the one person I least expected. That day changed everything. When I look back on those years, I sometimes wonder how I managed to carry the weight of silence for so long. Silence has a way of shaping the body. Shoulders curve inward, eyes learn to look down, the voice becomes hesitant, as if fearing its own echo. By the time I reached my teenage years, I was no longer the bright girl who loved to run barefoot through fields or sing hymns at church. I was a shadow of myself, taught by fear to shrink, to vanish, to endure. The house where I grew up was not large, just a modest two-story with peeling paint and a garden that rarely saw flowers. To outsiders it was ordinary, even warm, but for me it became a cage. The very walls that should have echoed with laughter turned into watchtowers. My brothers knew my routine, knew when my parents were away, knew how to twist every absence into opportunity. Each time the door closed behind my mother or father, I felt the air shift, as if the house itself braced for what was coming. What strikes me most, even now, is how quickly a child learns to adapt to captivity. I crafted little rituals of survival. I wore baggy dresses to hide my changing body, cut my hair short so I would appear less noticeable, pretended to be sick so that I could stay in my room. I taught myself to make excuses, to smile faintly at the dinner table even when my hands trembled under the cloth. And slowly I lost track of who I had been before. Fear is a teacher, and it taught me lessons no child should ever learn. It taught me how to listen for footsteps on the stairs, how to recognize the change in a voice before cruelty revealed itself, how to calculate escape routes in seconds. It also taught me shame. A shame so deep that even when I looked into the mirror, I saw not myself, but a girl convinced she was guilty of her own suffering. They planted those lies in me, and for a long time I let them grow. School, once a refuge, became another battlefield. My grades began to slip, my laughter disappeared, and teachers who once praised me now tilted their heads in concern. "You seem tired, Annabel," they would say. "Are you eating enough?" I longed to answer with the truth, to beg for help. But Robert's words, my youngest brother, echoed in my mind like scripture twisted for evil. "No one will believe you. They'll say you asked for it. They'll say you wanted it." And so I swallowed my voice until it lodged like a stone in my throat. There were moments when my body began to break under the weight of what I endured. Nights when fever burned me, when I trembled until my teeth rattled, when bleeding left me weak and barely able to stand. I remember one evening collapsing on the bathroom floor, the cold tiles pressing against my skin, my vision spinning. In that haze I whispered a prayer, not for rescue, but for release. I begged God to take me, to let the darkness swallow me, because living had begun to feel more like punishment than blessing. But the dawn always came, cruel in its persistence, forcing me to rise and wear the mask again. And yet, even in my despair, a fragile thread of hope remained. It came from my father. He was a man who spent weeks on the road, driving long routes across states. But when he returned, he treated me with gentleness that reminded me of the world beyond my prison. He would place candy in my hand, call me his little girl, tuck me into bed as if I were still a child safe from harm. In those fleeting moments I believed I was loved, and that belief kept me alive. When he was home, my brothers did not dare to come near me. His presence was my temporary salvation, though he never knew it. But presence is a fragile shield when absence stretches long. Each time he left, my heart sank, for I knew what awaited me. I tried to find courage in my mother, but her eyes had grown suspicious, poisoned by whispers my brothers fed her. They claimed I was growing reckless, that I flirted with boys in town, that I sought trouble. And though I denied it, I could see doubt flicker across her face. That doubt was a knife sharper than any threat, for it cut the bond I had once trusted. The years blurred into one long season of fear. I lost track of birthdays, of summers and winters. Time inside captivity is not measured in months, but in moments of terror, in the rhythm of doors opening and closing, in the weight of silence that follows a scream swallowed before it can reach the air. 10 years. 10 long years. Each one stole a little more of my childhood, a little more of my voice. And yet, a shift was coming. For as much as they tried to control me, they could not control everything. My body began to show signs of breaking. The fevers grew worse, the bleeding more severe, the frailty harder to hide. And it was through my weakness, not my strength, that the truth would finally find its way to the surface. I did not know it then, but the walls of my prison were beginning to crack. The one man who had always called me his little girl would soon see the truth with his own eyes. And once he saw, nothing would ever be the same again. There comes a time when the body refuses to carry what the soul has endured for too long. Mine began to falter in ways I could not hide. What I had once forced into silence started leaking into sight. Through the dark circles under my eyes, the trembling in my hands, the fainting spells that frightened even my captors. For nearly a decade, I had borne my prison in silence. But one night, that silence nearly cost me my life. It was late winter, the air heavy with the kind of cold that seeps through the thin walls of an old house. I remember waking with cramps so violent I could hardly stand. When I tried to make it to the bathroom, blood ran down my legs, hot against skin that had grown pale from years of fear. I collapsed before I could even cry out, my face striking the tile floor. The world spun into blackness, and I thought perhaps my prayer for release had finally been answered. But death did not come. Instead, when I opened my eyes, I saw my father kneeling beside me. He had returned early from one of his trips, arriving home hours sooner than expected. He had come to my room to place a gentle kiss on my forehead, as he always did when returning from the road. But instead of finding his daughter asleep, he found blood soaking through my sheets, my body limp and unresponsive. His voice still echoes in my memory, hoarse, trembling, filled with terror I had never heard before. "Annabelle, my child, what has happened to you?" In that moment, everything I had worked so hard to conceal was laid bare. He lifted me in his arms, rushing me through the house while calling out for my mother. My brothers, pale with panic, hovered at the edges like shadows trying to disappear. For once their power over me cracked. They were not in control. Fear showed in their eyes, not for me, but for themselves. The hospital was a blur of harsh lights, antiseptic air, and voices rising around me. I remember the sting of needles, the sharp words exchanged between nurses, the despair on my father's face as he gripped my hand. One doctor's voice still cuts through the fog of memory. "This girl has been a victim of repeated abuse. We must contact the authorities immediately." I turned my face away, ashamed. Even when truth stared back at us, I clung to silence. When a social worker asked me who had harmed me, I whispered a lie, that it had been strangers, faceless men from another town. My body betrayed me, but my voice remained imprisoned. I thought I was protecting my family, but in truth, I was only protecting those who had destroyed me. The days that followed in the hospital were filled with confusion. My father stayed by my side, his strong hands trembling as they held mine. My mother sat in a corner, eyes red from crying, her lips murmuring prayers that never seemed to end. But my brothers were absent. They did not come. They dared not. And yet, one evening, as the sun fell low and painted the hospital walls gold, the youngest of them crept into my room. His face was pale, his frame thin, his eyes haunted. For the first time I saw regret etched across his features. He whispered apologies, excuses, confessions tangled with fear. "They forced me," he said. "I never wanted to hurt you." His tears stained the floor as he begged me not to reveal the truth. But I turned my face to the wall, my heart torn between fury and pity. Even then, I could not find my voice. When I was finally released, I returned home to find the house changed. My father had repainted my room, placed a new lock on the door, and handed me the key with solemnity. "No one enters without your permission," he promised. His devotion was fierce, but suspicion flickered in his eyes. He did not believe my story of faceless strangers. I saw it in the way he studied my brothers, in the way his jaw clenched at the dinner table, in the way he asked questions that lingered without answers. The walls of my prison were trembling now, cracks spreading as truth threatened to seep out. My brothers grew restless, avoiding my gaze, their laughter forced, their whispers sharp. My mother tried to hold the family together, but even she could sense the fracture widening. And I, caught between fear and hope, wondered when the storm would break. For though I still lacked the courage to speak, I could feel it coming. The day when silence would no longer hold, when my father's suspicion would ignite into truth, when the hidden rot beneath our roof would be dragged into the light. I did not know how or when, but I felt it pressing closer with each breath. The walls of my prison could not stand forever. Suspicion does not enter a household like a storm. It seeps in slowly, a drop of water at a time, gathering silently until it finally bursts its banks. After the night of my collapse, my father no longer looked at me with only love. He looked with questions he dared not speak aloud. He saw the way my hands trembled, how my smile faltered when my brothers entered the room, how my eyes darted to the floor whenever someone pressed too close. He saw it, though I tried desperately to conceal it. And though I gave him explanations, excuses rehearsed over the years, his eyes betrayed the truth. He did not believe me. At first, he asked in subtle ways. He would linger at the table after supper, waiting for my brothers to leave, then ask, "Annabelle, has anyone hurt you?" My lips would move, but lies rushed out before honesty could surface. I told him I was tired, that school was overwhelming, that I had simply grown sickly. Each time I denied it, guilt pressed heavier on my chest. I wanted to tell him, but fear was a chain I could not yet break. My brother's warnings were carved deep into my mind. If you speak, no one will believe you. If you speak, you will destroy the family. So I kept silent. But silence does not protect. It corrodes. And my father's suspicion grew heavier with every passing day. I remember one evening when he returned from a week-long trip. He had always been affectionate, calling me his little girl, bringing small gifts tucked in his pocket. That night, he handed me a chocolate bar, one of my favorites, and I smiled as if the world were whole again. But his eyes did not soften. He watched me carefully, studying every movement. He asked again, this time with a voice so stern it cut through the air. "Tell me the truth. Who has done this to you?" My heart hammered, my mouth dry. I whispered the same lie I had rehearsed, that faceless strangers had followed me, that they had left me broken. His jaw clenched, his hand curled into a fist, and though he said nothing, I knew my lie had not convinced him. It was not long after that when the fragile fabric of secrecy finally tore apart. The day was stiflingly hot. One of those late summer days when the air feels thick and unmoving, when tempers fray at the edges. My brothers lingered in the living room, whispering among themselves, their eyes flicking toward me with nervous energy. I sat at the kitchen table pretending to study, the pages before me blurring into nonsense. My father entered suddenly, earlier than expected. He carried a folder in his hand, its edges worn from his grip. I knew immediately that something had changed. He placed the folder on the table, his face pale, his eyes fierce. With deliberate care, he spread the contents before me. Medical papers, reports from the hospital, words that stripped me bare in black ink, repeated injuries consistent with long-term abuse. The room fell silent. My brothers froze. My mother gasped, clutching her apron as if it could shield her. My father's voice trembled, yet it cut like a blade. "These are not the injuries of strangers. Why do you lie to me, Annabelle? Who are you protecting?" I stared at the papers, shame and terror twisting inside me. My brother's warnings thundered in my ears. I felt their eyes boring into me, willing me to remain silent. My throat closed, my body shaking. But then my father's voice hardened, louder, more commanding than I had ever heard. "Tell me, what secret have you been forced to keep? Who in this house has done this to you?" The words escaped before I could stop them. Barely a whisper, but enough. It was them. My own brothers? The silence that followed was deafening. My father closed his eyes as though the confession had pierced his soul. When he opened them again, something within him had broken, and something else had awakened. His gentleness vanished, replaced by a fury so raw it frightened even me. He turned on my brothers, his hands clenched, his voice thunderous with betrayal. The house erupted into chaos. My mother cried out, pleading for calm, but my father was unstoppable. Years of suspicion, months of doubt, and the weight of betrayal exploded into violence. He struck my brothers, shouting words I cannot repeat, demanding to know how they could commit such evil under his roof. My brothers, once so powerful over me, cowered like frightened children. Their lies, their control, their threats, they shattered in the face of my father's rage. Neighbors heard the shouting. Doors opened. Voices called. Soon, others filled our home, witnessing the unraveling of a family. The police were summoned, and I, trembling and broken, was asked to speak. For the first time in nearly 10 years, I told the truth aloud. The words poured out of me like water breaking through a dam. I told them of the whispers, the threats, the nights of terror, the shame that had silenced me. My brothers were led away in handcuffs, their faces pale, their eyes wide with fear. It should have felt like victory, but it did not. I watched them go with a hollowness that frightened me. They were my flesh and blood, and yet they had been my jailers. I felt no triumph, only emptiness. My father sank into a chair, his face buried in his hands. My mother wept uncontrollably, torn between love for her children and the horror of their betrayal. And I, though my secret was no longer hidden, felt exposed, raw, stripped of even the fragile armor silence had given me. That night, in the hospital once more, I lay awake staring at the ceiling. Nurses moved quietly around me, machines beeped softly, but I heard only the echo of my own confession. Freedom tasted bitter. Truth once spoken did not bring peace. It brought fire. My family lay in ruins. The house I had once called home would never be the same. And yet a strange thing stirred in me that night. For the first time in years, the chains around my voice had broken. I had spoken. My words had power. The darkness had been named. And though the aftermath was unbearable, something inside me whispered that this was the beginning of healing, even if healing first required destruction. I understood then that truth is not gentle. It tears, it burns, it breaks apart everything you thought you knew. But it also clears the ground for something new to grow. My prison had been shattered. What would rise from the ruins I did not yet know. But I felt for the first time the faint breath of possibility. The next chapter of my life would not be easier. It would bring its own trials, its own wounds, but I would never again be the girl bound in silence. That part of me had died the moment my father heard the truth, and from the ashes of that death, something new would begin. The day my brothers were taken away should have been the day I felt free. Neighbors gathered outside, whispering, some with pity, some with judgment, all with eyes that cut into me as though I were the spectacle of my own ruin. I sat on the front steps, shivering despite the summer heat, as the police car pulled away with them inside. The sound of the engine faded, but the echo of chains rattled in my heart. Everyone around me seemed to breathe easier, but I did not. Freedom had not yet reached me. Inside, the house felt hollow, like a body stripped of its soul. My father paced the floor like a restless lion, anger radiating from him in waves. He was not angry at me, never at me, but at himself, for not seeing, for not protecting. His words tumbled out in fragments. How could I have missed it? My own sons, under my roof. Each time he spoke, the weight of his guilt deepened, and I wanted to comfort him, to tell him none of it was his fault. But my voice failed. The words stuck in my throat, as if silence had become my default state, even after the truth had already torn itself free. My mother, on the other hand, was drowning in grief of a different kind. She wept for her sons, even as the truth of their cruelty stared her in the face. I would catch her murmuring prayers, clutching rosary beads until her knuckles turned white. She looked at me sometimes with sorrow, sometimes with blame. She did not say the words outright, but I could feel them pressing between us. If only you had stayed silent, the family would still be whole. I wanted to scream back, "Whole? We were never whole." I was dying inside, and you never saw it. But again, silence wrapped its chains around me. Those first weeks after their arrest were filled with questions I had no strength to answer. Investigators wanted details, lawyers wanted statements, doctors wanted to understand the extent of my injuries. Each time they asked, I felt my soul split open again, reliving moments I had spent years trying to bury. I gave them the truth in pieces, never in full, afraid that the full story would crush me. Their pens scratched across paper, recording fragments of a nightmare, but no ink could capture what it felt like to live inside it. At school, whispers spread like wildfire. Friends I had once trusted avoided me. Some stared with wide eyes filled with pity, others with suspicion. A few dared to approach, their voices laced with curiosity more than compassion. "Is it true, Annabelle? Did your brothers really—" I walked through those halls like a ghost, my body present but my spirit elsewhere. The shame they had planted in me grew even deeper. Even though the truth was out, I still felt branded, as if the stain of their sin had soaked into my skin. There were nights when I wished I could take it all back, swallow the confession, return to silence. At least then the world outside would still see us as a respectable family. At least then I would not feel the weight of every gaze, every whisper, every broken look in my father's eyes. But then I would remember the candle I had clutched in prayer, the nights I had begged God to end my suffering, the years of terror I had endured. And I knew I could not go back. The truth was a wound, but it was also a doorway. The trial loomed ahead like a dark mountain I was forced to climb. My brother's lawyers tried to twist the story, painting me as confused, unstable, a girl prone to exaggeration. They grasped at anything to discredit me. I remember sitting in the courtroom, my hands folded tightly in my lap, my heart pounding so loudly I could barely hear the questions. When I was asked to testify, the room spun. I looked across the aisle and saw their faces, once my family, now my tormentors. They would not meet my eyes. Shame had at last reached them, but it did not undo what they had done. Speaking aloud in that courtroom was like ripping open old wounds, but with each word, my voice grew steadier. For years I had been silenced. Now I was heard. The jury listened. The judge listened. And though the verdict took days to arrive, when it came, I felt the first true breath of freedom fill my lungs. They were sentenced. Justice, in its imperfect way, had been served, yet freedom outside did not mean freedom within. At night I still woke trembling, certain that they would return, that the door would creak open, that their voices would hiss threats in the dark. My father tried to assure me, "They cannot touch you now, Annabelle." But fear does not bow to logic. It lingers, it haunts, it gnaws at every quiet moment. The house itself became unbearable, filled with ghosts of the past. My father, desperate to protect me, suggested I move in with relatives. My mother resisted, unwilling to let me go, though she could not look me in the eye without breaking down. I felt caught between their grief, my father's guilt pulling one way, my mother's sorrow pulling another. In the end, it was decided I would be sent to live with an aunt in another town. That transition was another kind of captivity. My aunt was strict, her house filled with rules, her patience thin. She believed in discipline, not healing. She told me often to forget the past, to stop dwelling on things that could not be changed. But trauma does not vanish on command. It lingers like a shadow, slipping beneath every locked door. I found myself retreating further into silence, into prayer, into the only refuge that felt safe, the presence of God. It was during those months that the thought of religious life first stirred in me. Not as a calling yet, but as a question. What if I could leave behind this world of judgment, this endless cycle of sorrow, and dedicate myself wholly to God? Could vows erase the memories? Could a habit replace the weight of shame? I did not yet know the answers, but the thought lodged itself in my heart. Still, healing was far from complete. I wrestled with anger toward my mother for not protecting me, anger toward myself for staying silent, and even anger toward God for allowing such suffering. Prayer became less about seeking comfort and more about hurling questions heavenward. Why me? Why so long? Why silence from above when I needed you most? No answers came, only the slow, quiet presence of faith that refused to leave me, even in my rage. One night, months after the trial, I sat alone by a window, watching the moon cast pale light across the fields. For the first time in years, I allowed myself to imagine a future, not defined by captivity, not defined by shame, but by choice. The choice to live, to heal, to rebuild. It terrified me. Freedom is its own burden. But in that moment, I felt a flicker of something I had thought forever lost. Hope. That hope would guide me, though falteringly, toward the convent doors years later. But in the immediate aftermath of revelation, all I could do was cling to survival, one day at a time, one prayer at a time, one breath at a time. Yet even survival had its turning points. And soon, another event would strike like lightning, one that forced me to decide whether to remain broken or begin the painful journey toward healing. The weeks after the trial settled into months, and though my brothers were gone, their shadows still lingered in every corner of my life. Their absence did not erase the memories. It did not silence the whispers I still heard when I lay awake at night. Trauma is not bound by prison walls. It follows you, a ghost tethered to your spirit. And I carried it into each morning like a stone strapped to my chest. At my aunt's house, Survival became a different kind of test. She was a woman hardened by her own struggles, with little patience for weakness. "The past is the past," she would say briskly, brushing aside the tears I tried to hide. "You must be strong now, Annabelle. Life won't wait for you to heal." She thought she was helping, thought she was building my strength, but her words only deepened the silence I had known for so long. Instead of speaking my pain, I buried it deeper. I became quiet, obedient, invisible. School in that new town was no easier. Children, quick to notice what makes someone different, sensed something in me. My withdrawn nature, my avoidance of touch, the sadness I could not conceal. Some were kind, offering small smiles or invitations, but others whispered behind my back, inventing stories about the girl who had come to live with her aunt. Rumors are a cruel form of captivity. They trap you in lies you never chose, echoing the same helplessness I had felt at home, and so I retreated inward. I found small refuges where no one could reach me. The library became my sanctuary. Between its shelves, I could disappear into lives not my own, stories where pain was overcome, where heroines triumphed, where justice was not only a word but a reality. I clung to those stories as if they were lifelines. Sometimes I would sit for hours, running my fingers over the spines of books, breathing in the scent of paper and ink, imagining a life where my past was not my burden. But books could not erase the nights. Night remained my enemy. I would wake gasping, convinced I heard footsteps approaching, convinced I felt hands reaching for me. My aunt, irritated by my screams, would scold me for disturbing the house. I learned quickly to cry into my pillow, to muffle my sobs, to let the darkness swallow my fear in silence. It was during those years that my relationship with God began to shift. As a child, I had prayed desperately for rescue, for a miracle that never seemed to come. In the aftermath, my prayers turned to anger. I would kneel at night and whisper not petitions but accusations. Why did you allow it? Why did you not intervene? Why was I abandoned when I needed you most? The silence that followed was unbearable, and yet despite my fury I could not stop praying. Something in me, call it faith, call it stubbornness, refused to let go of God. Even when I believed he had turned his face from me, I clung to the hem of his robe. Slowly, something began to change in those prayers. Not in the answers, for answers never came, but in the act of speaking them. For the first time, I allowed myself to be raw, to be honest, to weep and rage before God without shame. And though heaven never thundered with replies, I began to sense a presence. Quiet, gentle, like a hand resting on my shoulder in the dark. It did not erase the pain, but it reminded me I was not alone. Still, healing was not linear. I stumbled often. There were days when despair threatened to swallow me whole, when I considered running away, leaving everything behind. On one such day, I found myself wandering near the church in my aunt's town. Its doors stood open, sunlight streaming through stained glass. I stepped inside, not knowing why, and found an old priest kneeling in prayer. He looked up, his eyes kind, and asked nothing of me except if I wanted to sit. I did. We sat together in silence for what felt like hours. That silence was different from the one I had known in my prison. It was gentle, not oppressive. For the first time, silence felt like rest. In time, I began to visit the church often. At first I came to escape. Later, I came to listen. The priest spoke of forgiveness, of suffering that could be transformed into compassion, of wounds that could become testimonies of survival. His words stirred something fragile in me. I was not ready to forgive, not yet. But the thought that my scars could have meaning, that they could serve more than shame, planted a seed in my heart. As I grew older, the pull toward a life of faith deepened. I watched the nuns who visited the parish, their calm presence filling the room like a balm. I envied their serenity, their certainty. I wondered if vows could strip me of my past, if service could transform my wounds into strength. Yet fear held me back. Could I ever belong among them? I who carried such darkness? Could God truly want someone as broken as me? The years passed and the world shifted. I grew into womanhood carrying a dual existence, the girl who had been silenced and the woman who longed to speak. My aunt urged me toward work, toward marriage, toward a life she believed would bury the past. But none of it called to me. My heart yearned for something different, something beyond the ordinary paths laid before women in that time. The turning point came one evening when I overheard my aunt speaking with a neighbor. "That girl," she said, her voice low but sharp, "she'll never be right after what happened. Mark my words, she'll carry it all her life." Her words stung, not because they were entirely false, but because they reduced me to nothing more than my suffering. In that moment, a fire lit within me. I refused to let my identity be forever bound to victimhood. That very week, I sought counsel with the priest. I told him of my anger, my shame, my doubts. He listened without judgment, then said something I will never forget. "Annabelle, God does not erase scars. He redeems them. What you have survived is not your identity, it is your testimony." Those words broke something open in me. For the first time, I saw my past not only as a burden, but as a weapon forged in fire. The idea of joining a convent did not come as a sudden revelation, but as a slow, steady calling. Each visit to the church, each prayer whispered through tears, each conversation with those who lived in service added another stone to the path. I was terrified, yes, but I also felt a strange peace, as if I were stepping into the place I had been meant to find all along. And yet, the decision was not simple. My mother, when I wrote to her of my thoughts, responded with confusion. She begged me not to waste my life behind walls, not to let the past drive me into solitude. My father, on the other hand, though broken by years of guilt, encouraged me. "If it brings you peace, child," he wrote, "then it is the right path." Those conflicting voices swirled inside me, but in the end, I chose to listen to the one voice that had remained constant even in silence, the quiet presence of God. When I finally walked through the convent doors, the weight I carried did not vanish. The memories followed me, the nightmares continued, the scars remained. But here, for the first time, I found a place where silence was not a prison, but a sanctuary. The walls of the convent did not close me in, they sheltered me. The prayers did not bind me, they freed me. Yet even within those sacred walls, the journey of healing was not over. If anything, it had only begun. For vows do not erase the past, they demand you confront it with honesty. And soon I would discover that the path to true healing required something even harder than survival. It required forgiveness. Life inside the convent gave me something I had long craved: safety. The walls stood firm against the world, the chapel bells marked the hours with certainty, and the sisters surrounded me with kindness. For the first time in my life, I did not live in constant fear of footsteps in the night. And yet, even surrounded by prayer and peace, my past followed me. Nightmares still clawed their way into my sleep. Memories still rose unbidden, sharp and unrelenting. Safety alone does not bring healing. Healing demands something far more difficult: forgiveness. I resisted that word for years. Forgiveness felt like betrayal. How could I forgive the ones who had stolen my childhood, my innocence, nearly my very life? To forgive felt like excusing them, like lessening the truth of what they had done. I told myself I could survive without forgiving, that I could live quietly within these walls and leave the past behind me. But the past is not left behind. It lingers, waiting until it is faced. The first time I heard the call to forgive came during a Sunday homily. The priest spoke of Christ on the cross, whispering, "Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do." His words struck me like a blow. I sat frozen in the pew, my hands gripping the wood so tightly my knuckles whitened. My heart pounded. The thoughts spiraled in my mind. If Christ could forgive, am I not also called to forgive? But the answer came as a scream from deep within me. No, I cannot. I will not. That night I lay awake in my cell, staring at the small wooden crucifix on the wall. I whispered into the darkness, "You ask too much. You saw what they did. You heard my prayers as a child, and you did not stop them. How can you now ask me to forgive them?" The crucifix gave no reply, but its silence was heavier than words. Time did not ease the struggle. If anything, it sharpened it. Each day I prayed. Each day I worked alongside the sisters. Each day I sang hymns meant to lift my soul. And each day bitterness clung tighter around my heart. I smiled outwardly, but inside I remained captive. The bars were no longer my brother's threats. They were my own unforgiveness. It was during a Lenten retreat that the breaking point came. A visiting nun, old and frail, spoke to us about her life. She had lived through war, had seen her family destroyed, had endured suffering I could hardly imagine. Yet she spoke of forgiveness as if it were breath itself. To forgive, she said, is not to deny the wound. It is to refuse to let the wound own you. Her words pierced me. I realized then that my refusal to forgive did not punish my brothers. It punished me. They had taken my childhood. By clinging to bitterness, I was allowing them to keep the rest of my life as well. That realization did not make forgiveness easy. It only made it unavoidable. I began the long and painful process, not with words, but with prayer. At first, my prayers were raw and defiant. "God, I cannot forgive them. Do not ask it of me." Later they softened. "God, if you want me to forgive, then you must teach me how." It was not a single moment, but 1,000 small ones. Each time I lit a candle, I whispered their names. Each time I knelt in prayer, I asked for the strength not to hate. Some days I felt progress. Other days I drowned in bitterness again. Forgiveness, I learned, is not a single act but a journey. It must be chosen again and again, sometimes every hour. The hardest part was confronting the memory of my mother. For years I had harbored anger toward her, anger for her blindness, for her silence, for the times her gaze seemed to hold blame instead of compassion. How does a daughter forgive a mother who turned away? It was easier to hate my brothers, for their guilt was clear. But my mother's failure cut deeper. It was betrayal wrapped in love. One evening, as dusk painted the convent windows gold, I sat with the Mother Superior. She listened quietly as I poured out my pain, my anger, my confusion. When I finished, she placed her hand gently over mine and said, "Child, forgiveness is not something you do for them. It is something you do for yourself, so that you may be free." Her words echoed the frail nun's message, yet somehow in that moment they sank deeper. I realized that holding on to anger was a chain I had forged myself. If I ever wanted to be truly free, I had to let go. The years slowly softened me. I began to write letters, not to send, but to release. In them, I told my brothers the truth of what they had done, the pain they had caused, the scars they had left. And at the end of each letter, trembling, I wrote the words, "I forgive you." Each time it felt false, but each time it grew a little easier. The letters piled up, a hidden testimony of a heart learning to release. Then one day, long after they had served their sentences, I received word that one of my brothers had died. The news struck me strangely. There was no triumph, no relief, only sorrow for a life wasted, for choices that had destroyed not only me but him as well. I took one of my letters, folded it carefully, and burned it in the chapel's candle flame. As the paper curled into ash, I whispered aloud, "I forgive you." For the first time, I felt the chains loosen. Forgiveness did not erase the past. It did not heal every scar, but it changed the way the past lived inside me. No longer a festering wound, it became a scar I could carry without shame. In learning to forgive, I discovered a deeper truth. Healing is not only survival, it is transformation. And in that transformation, I began to glimpse a purpose greater than my pain. Perhaps my story was not only mine, perhaps it was meant to be told, to bring light into the darkness others carried. But telling it would require something I had not yet fully embraced: the courage to speak openly, to break the silence not only within my family, but within the world. And that step I knew would come with its own trial. Silence had been both my shield and my prison for so long that even within the convent walls, I clung to it as though it were my only safety. I prayed in silence, worked in silence, carried my scars in silence. Yet deep down, I knew that healing could not remain locked away. It had to be spoken. Truth once hidden grows heavy if it is not shared. I had learned this lesson once when I finally confessed to my father. Now I faced it again. This time in a gentler, but no less terrifying form. The call to tell my story beyond these walls. The first time the Mother Superior asked me to share during a small gathering, I nearly fainted. My hands grew clammy, my chest tight, my voice trapped somewhere between heart and throat. I shook my head quickly, whispering, "I cannot." She did not press me, only smiled kindly and said, "One day, you will." Her certainty unsettled me. How could she know? But God has a way of planting seeds through people who see what we cannot yet see in ourselves. That seed began to grow quietly, watered by small encounters I had not expected. A young girl came to the convent once with her mother, her eyes shadowed, her voice barely audible. I recognized the look instantly. It was the same hollow gaze I had once worn. I wanted to reach out, to tell her she was not alone, to whisper that survival was possible. But fear clamped my mouth shut. I watched her leave, and afterward I wept in my cell. That night I begged God, "If you want me to speak, give me courage, for mine has run dry." Over time, the opportunities multiplied. Parish groups invited sisters to speak about faith, about perseverance, about finding God in hardship. Each time, my name appeared on the list, and each time I tried to hide behind excuses. Another sister was more suited, my health was too fragile, I had nothing of value to say. Yet the excuses grew thinner, and the quiet urging in my heart grew louder. The breakthrough came in the most unexpected way. One autumn evening, during a retreat, I sat by the fire with a small group of women. We had been asked to share our journeys of faith. One by one they spoke of their struggles, illness, loss, betrayal. Their honesty touched me deeply. Then all eyes turned to me. My lips trembled. The old fear returned, the fear that if I spoke, I would be judged, pitied, or dismissed. But then I remembered that young girl who had visited the convent, her eyes filled with the same pain I once carried. If I remained silent, how many others would walk away believing they were alone? My voice shook as I began. At first, only fragments came. Phrases like, "I was not safe in my own home," and "my silence nearly killed me." Yet once the first words slipped out, more followed. I spoke haltingly with long pauses, but I spoke. When I finished, the women sat in silence, tears glistening in their eyes. One reached over, squeezed my hand, and whispered, "Thank you." I thought I was the only one. That moment changed everything. I realized that my voice, once a source of terror, could now be a tool of healing. Each time I spoke afterward, it became a little easier. Not easy, never easy, but possible. The shame that had once silenced me began to transform into testimony. The more I shared, the more I discovered that my story did not belong to me alone. It belonged to every silent soul sitting in shadows, too afraid to speak. When I told my truth, I saw recognition in their eyes, and in that recognition, I found strength. My scars became a bridge, connecting me to others who carried wounds of their own. Yet speaking also brought backlash. Not everyone wanted to hear the truth. Some whispered that I exaggerated, that sisters should not speak of such things openly, that such confessions disturbed the peace of the parish. Their words cut deeply, reopening old doubts. But each time I returned to prayer, asking God to remind me why I spoke. The answer was always the same, because silence kills and truth gives life. As the years passed, I began to speak not only in small groups, but in larger gatherings. Invitations arrived from schools, churches, even support groups beyond the convent. I trembled each time, but I accepted. My story spilled into the world, sometimes clumsily, sometimes with tears, but always with honesty. And with each telling, the chains around my heart loosened a little more. One memory stands above all. I was invited to speak at a youth retreat. The room was filled with teenagers, restless and skeptical, their arms crossed, their eyes daring me to reach them. I told them of my childhood, of the silence that had nearly destroyed me, of the day I finally spoke. At first they shifted uncomfortably, uncertain how to respond. But then one girl, no older than 16, began to cry. Afterward, she came to me, her whole body shaking, and whispered, "That's my story too." She clung to me as if I were her lifeline. In that moment, I knew beyond doubt, my pain had found its purpose. Still, speaking was never without cost. Each telling reopened wounds, stirred nightmares, brought back voices I wished to forget. But I learned to see the pain differently. It was no longer chains binding me. It was the weight of a cross I chose to carry. Not for myself alone, but for those who could not yet carry theirs. The convent sisters supported me, though some worried that I revealed too much. Mother Superior, however, stood firm. She told me once, "Your testimony is not rebellion, Annabelle. It is obedience to the truth God has written on your life." Her words gave me courage when doubt threatened to drown me, and so I continued. Slowly, carefully, imperfectly. Each time I stepped forward, I carried with me the memory of that terrified girl who once hid beneath covers, clutching a wooden cross, begging God for rescue. Now, at last, she was being rescued, not by silence, but by voice. Yet even as I embraced this calling, another challenge loomed. Forgiveness had begun its work in me, but healing is never finished. Speaking gave me freedom, yes, but it also forced me to confront new questions. Could I share my story with love, not bitterness? Could I speak of my brothers without hatred? Could I let my voice be not only a cry of pain, but a witness of grace? Those questions haunted me, and soon life would test them in a way I had not expected. It is one thing to speak your story in rooms filled with strangers, to let your words drift into the ears of those who will weep, nod, and then return to their own lives. It is another thing entirely to stand face to face with the ghosts of your past. For years, I told myself that I had forgiven. I whispered the words in prayer, wrote them in letters I never sent, burned them into ashes as offerings to heaven. But true forgiveness, I would soon learn, is not tested in silence. It is tested in encounter. I was well into my life as a sister when the letter arrived. It came one spring morning, tucked among the usual parish mail. My hands trembled as I recognized the handwriting. My surviving brother, older now, weakened by years behind walls, had written to me. In careful, uneven script, he asked for a meeting. He claimed he wanted to apologize, to seek peace before his life came to its end. My first instinct was to tear the letter in two, to burn it as I had burned my unsent confessions. Rage flared within me. How dare he reach for peace after the devastation he had left behind? How dare he ask for my presence when he had once stolen my very breath? Yet beneath the fury, another voice whispered, a voice I had come to know well. If you truly forgive, Annabelle, then meet him. Not for his sake, but for your own. I wrestled with that decision for days. I prayed in the chapel until my knees ached, pacing the aisles like a restless soul. Some sisters cautioned me against it, fearful of the pain it would reopen. Others encouraged me, saying forgiveness is never complete until it is lived. In the end, I chose to go, not because I wanted to, but because I knew the chains on my heart would never fully break until I faced him. The meeting took place in a modest hospice facility. By then, time had stripped him of the power he once wielded. His hair was gray, his body frail, his voice thin as parchment. For a moment, seeing him like that, I felt a pang of sorrow, not for the man he was, but for the boy he had once been before cruelty consumed him. He looked at me with eyes filled not with arrogance, but with desperation. His words stumbled as he confessed, his voice cracking. "I was wrong, Annabelle. I destroyed what I should have protected. I do not deserve your forgiveness, but I beg for it." I sat in silence, my heart a battlefield. Memories surged. Nights of terror, whispers that stole my voice, the years lost to captivity. My hands clenched, my breath shallow. Part of me wanted to rise, to walk away, to leave him drowning in his regret. But another part, the part shaped by years of prayer and reflection, held me still. At last I spoke. My voice was steady, though my body shook. "You were my jailer for nearly 10 years. You took what was not yours to take. You silenced me, broke me, left me with scars that will never fade. And yet, I forgive you, not because you deserve it, but because I cannot carry the weight of hatred any longer." Tears slid down his cheeks. He reached for my hand, but I did not offer it. Forgiveness did not mean reconciliation. It did not mean trust restored. It meant release, for me, not for him. I left that hospice feeling both emptied and filled. Emptied of bitterness I had carried for too long, filled with a strange, quiet peace I had never known before. For the first time, I understood what it meant when Christ said his yoke was easy, his burden light. The burden of hate had been heavier than I ever realized until I finally set it down. That encounter did not erase the scars. Nightmares still came, though less frequently. Pain still echoed, though more faintly. But the chains that once bound my spirit had been broken. In the years that followed, I continued to share my story, but now my words carried a different weight. No longer only a testimony of survival, they became a witness of grace. I told others not only that silence destroys, but also that forgiveness frees. I saw lives shift before my eyes. Women, men, even children who heard my story and found the courage to speak their own. One evening, after a talk at a parish far from my convent, a young woman approached me. Her voice trembled as she confessed that she too had lived years in captivity of another kind, trapped by fear and shame. "Hearing you tonight," she said, "gave me the strength to finally tell someone. I do not want silence to own me anymore." She hugged me tightly, and I felt the circle complete. My pain had been transformed into a lantern, guiding others out of their own darkness. But even as my voice grew stronger, even as peace replaced bitterness, I realized there was still one person left to forgive: myself. For years, I blamed myself for the silence, for the lies I told to protect my abusers, for not crying out sooner. For every moment I thought I could have escaped, shame clung to me like a second skin. But forgiveness of others means little if we do not also forgive the child we once were. I had to look back at the frightened girl I had been, the girl who clutched a wooden cross beneath her blanket, who begged God for rescue, who endured what no child should endure, and tell her she was not weak. She was not guilty. She was not to blame. That act of self-forgiveness was harder than forgiving my brothers. It took years of prayer, years of tears, years of speaking truth aloud until I believed it. But when at last I whispered, "Annabelle, it was never your fault," I felt a liberation even deeper than when I left the hospice. The chains were gone. I was free, and yet, even in freedom, I knew my story was not finished. I had forgiven. I had spoken. I had found peace. But there remained one final step, a testimony not whispered in convent halls or parish gatherings, but declared fully, openly, to the world. A confession that would seal my journey and leave no shadow hidden. That step awaited me, and I knew it would demand every ounce of courage I had ever gained. The candle burns low beside me now, its flame unsteady but refusing to die. I sit in the quiet of this convent, the place that became both my refuge and my proving ground, and I think of the journey that brought me here. Once I was a prisoner in my own home. Later I was a prisoner of silence, of shame, of bitterness. But tonight, as I put these words to voice, I know that I am a prisoner no longer. For years I believed survival was the greatest victory. To endure, to simply wake each day and breathe, felt like triumph enough. But survival, I have learned, is only the beginning. Healing demands more. It demands honesty, it demands forgiveness, and most of all, it demands courage to step into the light when every instinct tells you to remain in shadows. When I first arrived at this convent, I thought vows would erase my past. I thought prayer and discipline would strip me of the memories that haunted me. But vows do not erase, they transform. Prayer does not silence the past, it redeems it. What I once carried as chains, I now carry as testimony. My scars, once marks of shame, have become signs of endurance. There are still nights when memories return, sudden and sharp, when I hear echoes of voices that once bound me. But now, when those nights come, I light a candle and remember that even the smallest flame defies darkness. I whisper the same prayer I once whispered as a terrified girl beneath her blanket. But now my words carry new strength. Lord, stay with me. And I know He does. I have forgiven my brothers. I have forgiven my mother. Most of all, I have forgiven myself. That forgiveness did not come in a single moment. It came in layers, in years of tears, in countless prayers. But it came, and with it peace. Not a peace that forgets, but a peace that accepts. My story is not unique. There are countless others who live in silence, who believe they are alone, who think their suffering is theirs to bear forever. To them I say, you are not alone. Silence may bind you, but it cannot define you. Darkness may press against you, but even the faintest light can push it back. If you cannot speak today, speak tomorrow. If not tomorrow, then the day after. One day, your voice will come, and when it does, it will set you free. My name is Annabelle Cross, and though my life began in chains, it has not ended there. I am a woman who was broken, yes, but also rebuilt. I am a sister, a servant, a survivor. My scars are not my shame. They are my story. As I close this confession, I know there will always be those who question, those who whisper, those who prefer silence to truth. But I no longer fear them. I have faced the worst, and I have lived. My life is proof that what is meant to destroy us can, through grace, become what strengthens us. Tonight, as the flame dwindles and the night deepens, I make this final vow. Never again will I hide my truth. Never again will I let silence own me. My voice is mine now, and with it, I choose to speak, not only for the girl I once was, but for every soul still waiting for their own release. And so my story, once buried in fear, ends here, in light.